So my name is Aishwarya Joshi, and I go by Ash. I am a third-year doctoral student at Idaho State University. So we're going to talk about exploring and navigating of imposter syndrome among doctoral students / candidate who are international in counseling programs in the US. So let's get started. And please feel free to interrupt, jump in if you have thoughts, questions, comments, whatever. And I know this is recording, but to the people here who may be watching, I am talking to actual live participants who are sitting in with me. So starting off with, all right, if I can do this right today. So what is impostorism? Impostorism or imposter phenomena is this experience of feeling like a fraud or having the sense of fraudulence and not belonging in a space that is considered to be high achieving, a space that is deemed to be successful. And this is a very internal and complex experience. It was first identified by Dr. Clance and Dr. Imes in 1978. And they developed their first IP scale in 1985. So this imposter phenomena, when it was first identified, more predominantly, it was identified with women who were in positions of power in terms of being businesswomen or entrepreneur, or being in position of, let's say, a dean of an institution. Because during that time, that was rare. I mean, I shouldn't say rare. It was women were getting equitable rights. But because women were getting equitable rights, or the feminist movement had already started, this is where in those specific spaces, women started feeling this sense of, I don't belong here, which led to a lot of internal conflicts because innately those spaces were not created for them. So in 2011, Dr. Sakulku reported that about 75% of the millennials experience imposter syndrome at least once in their lifetime. And although it started off with gender, moving forward, when we started looking at intersectionality, so imposter phenomena is complex because it is added or fueled by additional layers of identities, especially marginalized and minoritized identities that impacts imposter phenomena a lot more than other identities that are on the position of power and privilege. So for example, would be Dr. Coakley and his colleagues did this study among graduate students. And what they found was Asian American experience a lot more imposter phenomena, whereas Black American students experienced a lot more minority status stress. But they both reported higher levels of imposter phenomena because of those identities or the complexities of their own identities in the context of USA. So now, because of that, when I look at imposter phenomena, I see that as a multifaceted experience. It is very complex, it is very internal. And because of that, it is not very well studied among certain populations. And I am gonna show this link. So let's see if this will work. And Michelle Obama does a better job at explaining it than I do. Can you all hear this? Wait. I did something. I know what I need to do. Stop screen sharing. Share screen. Yes, sound share. Share sound.
Enter into an elite school when your high school counselor has told you're not good enough.
Why is the sound not working? You can turn the sound on a little bit louder on the computer. I did. It's full. It says. This is not going to be great. Why are you doing this to me today? It says it's full.
Okay, so I think it might be because it's connected to the projectors where the sound is coming out. So if not, then we can just do closed caption and everyone else will just.
Is that a sound coming out? Well, I may have to do just do closed caption. That's a lot more because I'm not technology savvy. Yes.
Now, when all of society sort of looks at kids of color or kids from poor communities or rural communities as not belonging, I, like many others, walked into that school with a stigma in my own head. More young people nowadays call it imposter syndrome. I don't know if they call it that in Britain, where kids like me feel like they don't belong. And I had to work to overcome that question that I always ask myself, am I good enough? And I write about that. That's a question that has dogged me for a good part of my life. Am I good enough to have all of this? Am I good enough to be the First Lady of the United States? And I think that many women, and definitely many young girls of all backgrounds, walk around with that question. But how I overcame that is how I overcome anything: hard work. So whenever I doubted myself, I just told myself, let me put my head down and do the work, and I would let my work speak for itself. And I still find that I do that. I still feel that at some level I have something to prove because of the color of my skin, because of the shape of my body, because of who knows how people are judging me.
So
Introducing the all-new Vault from Nordic Track. Ready? It's what's inside that inspires,
skate towards the goal. Come on.
motivate,
I do not like this. God help me. Yes. So with that, what I was talking about when I spoke of imposter phenomena, that the complexities of one's identity is impacted on how, especially for a minoritized or marginalized identity, how within the context of US, that identity impacts that feeling of belongingness, because sense of belongingness, as to those people who attended Dr. Chan's presentation yesterday, spoke about that it isn't just one identity that allows us to focus on our emotional and mental well-being. It is the culmination of all these identities where we can bring them out in public spaces together, is where we look at our holistic wellness. And this feeling of impostorism, especially in spaces that are deemed as high achieving, the sense of belongingness completely gets lost.
So as you were speaking, I was thinking about when the study took place in '78, or the original study, and then how it progressed in the '80s. I'm thinking of the ways in which affirmative action kind of increased some of these feelings, and the ways in which individuals were then brought into workspaces who ordinarily wouldn't be able to be there, such as women, ethnic minorities, etc. And if their imposters syndrome was flaring up during that time because their coworkers and colleagues also felt that they did not belong there, or they were only brought in because of affirmative action.
Oh, absolutely. It's almost, especially for somebody holding a minoritized or marginalized identity, it's a double-edged sword.
Yes.
So either you have this hypervisibility or you have this invisibility. And especially during these times, especially in workspaces where these people who initially were brought in as the name of bringing in diversity or checking in a box of equity or equality, or this is an equal space, all of that led to this feeling of, okay, why am I here? And a lot of imposter feelings are brought in because of the external stereotypes. An example I could give is, oh, you're Asian, you must be smart. You must be in computer science. So those stereotypes, once we start internalizing them, this is where that imposter feeling comes out. So it isn't something that as people of minoritized identity come in with. It is something that is fostered while they're in those spaces and navigating the other minoritized identities they hold and how the societal stereotypes impacts those identities, which makes this more complex.
I think even too, like some of those stereotypes that you just are talking about, if there are, kind of positive stereotypes, like, okay, but they even positive stereotypes have negative implications. Like, I mean, I know many of some of my very best friends are Asian, and it's just like, well, they expect us to be smart. They expect, us to, be good at math. We're gonna have to be good at statistics. What if you're not good at math and you're not good at statistics and you're Asian? You know what I mean? Like it's just kind of those things that even if they're seen as positive, like the model minority, it's still just this expectation you walk around with that you have to be good at those things.
And that creates a lot of pressure then to perform. And I'm going to switch off to a little bit, bringing back to the international population as to why. This one of the things that I want to talk about before even I go there is this phenomena has not been studied with counselor education within counseling. It is interesting to me that at this point, because this phenomena has been studied with psychology. It has studied with population and social sciences, in nursing, in engineering, but not in counseling or counselor education. And on the other hand, in passing conversation, in my lived experience, I haven't had any international student or even a doctoral student telling me that they don't feel like an imposter. So it is a very common phenomena and not studied or not acknowledged. That's a soapbox I don't want to get into. So moving to the population that we're going to talk about today is international students. So why international students? One, international students, especially in counseling and counselor education programs, are at a rise. And it is not just specific in counseling and counselor education, even within USA. The decennial data for 2060 projects an increase of 16% of immigrant, non-immigrant people coming to the US. And that is going to be the highest since 1947, when it was like 12.5%. So since then, this has been the highest record of immigrant population or non-immigrant population coming to the US to work. The other piece why it is important is because international faculty members or international employees in the US who are on work visa generate about $18 billion a year for US population. That's one fact. The other piece is looking at when we talk about the profession of counseling and counselor education, we talk about multiculturalism, we talk about diversity. And a big portion of this is that international population is often ignored when we're talking about marginalization or minoritization, because there is this hypothetical assumption or a stereotype that if you're an international student, you come from a position of privilege, which is not accurate in so many levels. So that's one reason why it is important to bring in focus on international students, especially in counseling and counselor education, because they do contribute to the diversity. They do contribute to the multiculturalism, social justice, and equity, because they are bringing in funds of knowledge from across the world, from their own lived experiences in their own culture, their own society. And what they're doing is they are bringing it back and forth. So it isn't just that they're bringing all of that knowledge to counseling field in the US, they're also taking it back when they go back home. So it is like a cross-cultural or cross-connection of knowledge and sharing of knowledge. So from my lens, I believe it is important to focus on that when we talk about the MSJCC competence, because I do remember at one of our conversations with Dr. Wong Ratz, one thing even he identified that although they developed the MSJCC, they didn't give its due credit to the international population, and they need to focus more on the globalization of counseling field. The other thing is that in the context of oppression and marginalization, international identity overlaps in a lot of those experiences of minoritization and marginalization in the US that a domestic person who is from US who holds a minoritized or marginalized identity experiences. So it's almost like these layered of complex experiences is added on by this international identity, which in itself is hard to define. Because we have, and who is an international counselor is a huge debate, because it's so hard to define that. Given the context of where they're from, are you a first generation international immigrant in the US? Are you a refugee? Are you a non-immigrant person coming to the US to study, to work, and who are still on a temporary visa. So there's so many complexities of an international identity. The other big piece is this lack of belongingness. For an international student coming to the US for the purpose of education, fostering a career, the sense of belongingness often gets lost because of their acculturation process. So there is this already internal conflict that's going on while they come to the US, where they are bringing in their own culture, and then they're trying to adjust the culture of United States as a whole. That means, let's say an example would be a person coming from a very collectivist, interdependent culture, coming to the US, which is very independent, overarchingly, very I-centered instead of we-centered, and trying to adjust or navigate through those internal conflicts because everybody wants to fit in. You don't want to be an outsider. And throughout that process, they always experience this feeling of isolation and lack of belongingness. That's another reason why it is so important to study imposter phenomena with this population, because all of their experiences only fuels that imposterism even more than it's already there. Yeah.
Sorry, I apologize for.
Please do not apologize. Talk to me. Yes.
One thing that I was kind of thinking about too is the idea of also learning English while you're, I mean, many of my international students friends, they speak English really well, but they think that they don't know English very well because they get to America and, it's, the slang and all those different things. So they're navigating that and also navigating the culture of whatever department you're in your doctoral program, and how, like, what's normal there. And I've seen some of my friends go through things like such as comps and their dissertation proposal, and in their home country, it's customary to bring, food to the comps exam, and it's like, no, you can't do that. Why can't I do that? That's like, why we show respect for my culture. And so I think that's like really interesting and also extremely important to keep in mind, because some of our international students may really want to do those things, and it's not, as a way to like, try to pass comps like they're not going to or something like that, but just that's how they do it in their culture. And that's their cultural expectation, that when they're at home and they do comps, you bring gifts for your whole committee and stuff like that, and you're that seen as something that you can't do.
And this experience of minoritization is a cultural shock, because
Mhm.
somebody coming from a country, a place, people look like them all the time. They speak the same language. They, have the same nonverbal or onomatopoeia or whatever language, the way they communicate, which is beyond words, it's the same. But then when they come to the United States, that whole shift happens. So it's not just about learning English, because even learning English is a process in terms of translating whatever they know from first in their own language, then to English, trying to figure out the sentence construction and grammar all the time while having an actual conversation. It is exhausting to even think like that.
And then one thing I can also like share or just mention myself is that I was born in Ukraine, but I did grow up in the US. So I mean, I can't really consider, I guess, an international student, but I can relate to like some of that a little bit, just because I grew up here. I can't, it's a little bit different, but I think that struggle is very much real, because you're having to go back. I mean, I don't have to do that anymore because English is more, my predominant language, but they have to do that all the time. Just, from Korean to English, back to Korean. I mean, and then especially with writing, I mean, everything takes a lot longer.
And that could be so emotionally taxing. And that also fuels, once again, the sense of belongingness, because it's almost, especially in white institutions in the US, the culture is white. It is taught with the white lens. So this experience of racist nativism is very prevalent in counseling and counselor education. So where a person's proficiency in English is perceived or equated to their intelligence. So here there's already this cultural gaps, this lack of belongingness going on. And then you add this piece of, okay, now even my professors are perceiving me as incompetent because I can't speak English, although I am bilingual, trilingual, a polyglot, whatever it is. So that also is the reason why there has to be a little more focus on identifying imposter phenomena and how it impacts international students, which I'm going to go in the next slide as to what happens. So consequences. One of the biggest consequences of imposter phenomena that was studied and that have been continuously studied among our closest related field is psychology, is the mental and emotional well-being. So a lot of researchers like Dr. Arthur and his colleagues, they all studied mental health impact, which is basically a very high increased level of anxiety and depression that was found in, and this study was done on Canadian students for the experience of imposter phenomena, that they had a very high level of anxiety, they had very high levels of depression, and because of that, their mental health impact, it also then impacted in their achievement and attrition in doctoral program, which was then conducted by their colleagues, Dr. Hunter and Dr. Devine in 2017, which said that a culmination of doctoral students in US and Canada, their attrition rate is only 57%. And this is highly fueled by the imposter phenomenon because they try to go in to this high achieving field of doctoral degree or a PhD, and they can't seem to finish it because of this tendency to wanting to be a perfectionist or having this stereotypical pressure or non-verbal expectation that you are in this space, the space of privilege, and now you have to perform. Now you have to be the best of the best, or however language they use. And that creates a lot of that internal conflict, especially for international students who in the first place begin to think that what's the space really created for me? This is a conversation I remember having now with Dr. Graham and a really good friend of mine, because at that time he was Dale, that Ash, it is normal for you to feel this way. This space wasn't created for you to be here. So whatever you're fighting right now, you are bound to fight it because they didn't consider this while they brought you in. And I'm just one example of all the other international students who come into the US, especially in the spaces of counseling and counselor education, with this notion of, because we are in a very unique position to help. The empathy that we hold because as our identities as counselor, it's an assumption that we may be more open or we may be more considerate, but the reality isn't as such. And for international students who are coming in, it's this naivety that, oh, we are counselor educators, we know better. We are counselors, we know better. Clearly, all of you who have seen SESNET, that's not the case. But going off of that, this also impacts then their career development. When I talk about career development, a lot of articles that I read was by Dr. Dollarhide of talking about the professional identity and how imposter phenomena impacts this professional identity of counselors. The one big piece about, I'm going back to Dr. Arthur's article when he was talking in his research was, it isn't just that it is about you being successful in your career. This imposter feeling then fuels about you are working with the population, especially, and this is regarding graduate master students in counseling, that you are working with client population who come from a different culture, who have a whole different international identity compared to yours. So because of your experience as counselors and training, now you're beginning to feel even more like you don't belong or you're a fraud because you don't have that experience with the same population. So you may have had experience working with different populations in your own country, but when you come to the US as a counselor and trainee, and you're working with white population predominantly, depending on what region you're working on, it is still an international population that you're working with. And your own competency then gets questioned. For counselor educators, Dr. Wu in her article speaks a lot about how their intelligence or even their competency is challenged by their students because of the lack of proficiency in English. So examples would be in one of her studies, one of her participants reported that students would refuse to call them a doctor. Students would, because they would not believe that, and in her experience, she said that the student actually said something along the lines of, she needs to earn my respect. You have a faculty who has a PhD. Shh. So those are the impact within career development.
Is this Dr. William?
Dr. Wu.
She went to the University of Iowa. She's been a long time. But I think that also brings to mind an idea that a lot of people talk about in my program. So in my program culture is that we call all of our professors doctor or whatever. And one discussion has been, it's like, well, why do we need to do that? And like, we get to call them by their first name after we pass our defense. Essentially, they kind of make the switch and let us call them by their first name. And some people in my program are like, well, that's why do we have to do that? I mean, we're college, and it's like, you're not college yet. You know what I mean? I think that whole calling some, and I think I noticed too that the female faculty in my department, I think more so want to and need to be called doctor than the male faculty members because of that piece that you're talking about, is like maybe not seeing them as a doctor, or just seeing them as like Susanna versus Dr. Wood.
And then that also then impacts us once again as to, okay, is this my space? Is this where I belong? And there's a constant internal battle that now I have to do better. In career spaces, I have to have 10 publications. I have to be able to meet, so that that piece of worthiness, proving your worthiness over and over again, it's on a continuum. So it starts off as a counselor in trainee, and to those who become counselors, it still continues. Am I doing good enough? Am I better enough? For counselor educators, am I still doing good enough? Am I better enough? And that literally brings it to like the minoritized and marginalized counselors and counselor educators in the US have the lowest retention rates. And even in terms of when we think about, okay, look at the status when I'm looking at as counselor educators, full professors, how many faculty, women, minoritized or marginalized identities of faculty have reached the status of full professor? How many?
I've also heard, sorry to interrupt.
No, you don't.
I have too much to say about this, but I know that shift between associate professor to full, oftentimes, at least at my university, I think is extremely, and I would say, I'm guessing probably at other universities, but I can't say for sure, is extremely political. It's like a political like move, like that you need to contribute X amount to your field for, like you're seen as like this awesome person worthy of full professorship.
And then think about the pressure and the feeling that, do I now even belong now?
There's people that just step away from, like they stop at associate professors, like, you know, I don't, that's not important to me. But then there's people that are like, I need to get that, because then it's like this like extra like another stamp of approval, and that I belong in this ivory tower academic world.
Yep. And there is a lot of elitism in academia. So then going to that, my next section is to like, what then can we do about it? So when I talk about solutions and strategies, something that we all know is peer support groups are something that have this abundance of literature that speaks to how it works, especially for minoritized and marginalized group. Peer supports work unconditionally in terms of fostering that sense of belongingness. To all who have done group work, Yalom speaks to it as this universality of experience in having groups and having the support group for individuals. So having a peer support group for international students is really supportive of fostering that connection, because as they come to the US, they're also leaving their own support systems back where they're coming from. It's not necessary that every international students who come to the US will bring in their support systems with them. So fostering the community, that support is so critical at interpersonal level for them to address this experience of imposter phenomena. The other piece of peer support group is that helps them also with their academic performance and success rates, because it is normalizing their experience. It is acknowledging that being an international student in the US is not an easy experience, because that acknowledgement in itself allows them to, take a deep breath and say, okay, I am experiencing this and this is real. This isn't just in my head anymore. The other thing is like when we talk about mentoring and mentorship, that in literature has seemed to be very successful across counseling, counselor education. However, within mentoring, like I am looking back at Dr. Ong's article talking about culturally relevant mentoring, because mentoring coming from a professor who doesn't hold the identities or any of the marginalized identity that potentially a student may hold, an international student may hold, creates a big rift of conflict, because then once again, what happens is because there's a shift in power and positionality with the mentor, the student wants to then please the mentor. So they're not getting what they need. Instead, now it's the role reversals, just like it parallels what we talk about with counselors and clients. We know what position as counselors we hold when we see our clients. The same goes in mentorship for international students in doctoral programs and their mentors. If you have a white privileged mentor working with an international student who holds a minoritized identity, there is a very high probability of them shifting into the role instead of the one who is seeking help, trying to make convenience for the mentor. Because once again, it is this piece of, I want to belong. So even if this isn't helpful, I'm still gonna nod my head and go with it. So it is so important that when bringing in mentors or when creating this mentoring relationship, it is culturally relevant. It is, mentors have training in working with international population so that the mentoring that is provided is equitable. It is meeting the student where the students are at, not just developmentally, but also culturally. At institutional levels, culturally responsive trainings are very important. We have this label of multicultural diversity standard trainings that doesn't touch upon any of the international student population, faculty population, none of it. So it is very important to have trainings that is specifically addressing international competencies and what they mean. Because realistically, within, let's say if I'm talking about a counselor trainee may see an international person coming to them. Either that person would be an immigrant, a non-immigrant refugee, just a non-immigrant student in college campuses. So the topographical region plays a very important role as to access, like, what kind of student population is here. But in order to do that, you still have to have a training that says, hey, you are in Denver, Colorado. A lot of immigrant population that come to Denver, Colorado are Hispanic, are Bhutanis, are Somalian refugees. So having that context in mind, like, or in Idaho, a lot of population in Idaho are LDS. So knowing that is so important in terms of training faculty members, administrators to work, with international population. The second piece of that comes is interdepartmental collaboration. A lot of times when I approach this piece of peer support group, a setback I get is, oh, but what if there are not that many international students? There has to be some form of a collaboration because there may not be any international student in your department, but there's a very high probability of having an international student in a different department. Maybe there's an international student in an MBA department who may be experiencing the same. So having this cross-departmental collaborations within an institution can be so supportive of fostering the community support for international students. The other pieces of interdepartmental collaboration is bringing in the international office to the classroom setting instead of saying, oh, there's the international office. Not knowing what is the role of the international office. Do they only work supporting you with immigration processes or policies, or are they really helping you integrate within this community? Bringing in, I'm hoping, and this is my assertion, that institutions have this culture and diversity center. Instead of pointing your fingers, go to the Culture and Diversity Center, bring in those people, do a cross-collaborative workshop with them as counselor educators, faculty members, administrators, so all of them in that particular institution knows what it is to bring in an international student on their campus or even an international faculty on their campus. Yep.
So in my current grad assistantship, I'm working for my university's graduate school.
Mhm.
In our graduate school program, we have a mentorship program in which we connect first-gen students, international students, ethnic minority backgrounds to mentors. One of the concerns, however, and it's useful, it creates like a cohort model for students, and that's wonderful. You got 30 graduate students, not kids. You got 30 graduate students coming in and meeting each other and doing social events, but also attending workshops. And one of the concerns is when we're pairing them with a faculty mentor, we do not have enough international faculty or even ethnic minority faculty on our campus. And as you mentioned, how it kind of continues from being in graduate school to even being in the profession of being in academia, these professors are already overwhelmed, right? Because they're still trying to prove they're enough. And we don't want to send mentees to them and add to their plate when they're already having to do this, that in their department and mentor students in their department. And then we're sending them an extra person. So it's almost like a never ending loop of like, we don't want to overwhelm you, but these students need you. right? They need to see
Absolutely.
you and they need your presence and they need your mentorship, but also like, are you okay? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So it's just like a weird,
It-
never ending loop.
Absolutely. And I think there's also this piece of the loop is then let's say, because it's this assertion that not every institution is going to have that.
Right.
And then there are also other channels where if you cannot be a mentor, there is the International Student and Faculty Interest Network. Can you connect your student to that? Please
One,
don't.
one super cool thing that one of our professors does for our intro to CES class, my professor, what she does is like we have to choose like a lot of different projects, but one of the projects that everyone has to do is this one where she pairs us with an alum from our program, like based on like things she knows about us or things that we're interested in. And so like there's a lot of students, you know, that have graduated from my program, a lot of international students, and so they pair, like, you know, she pairs us with them and like we can still keep in touch with them and we have to interview them and do a CES paper and stuff like that. And I think that's really cool. And I think another thing too that's really important, kind of touches what you were both talking about, is this whole international office. Like I think sometimes people just think, yep, they do the visa so you can go home, the visa so you can work and stuff like that. But the whole visa process is also extremely, I know from I've heard from students and my peers, so stressful. Like especially when they get a job, the in between period of when they graduate and they get their job, they can't go home, like, and they can't work. So it's, I mean, it's like there's a lot of things I think they take for granted that we think we know, but we don't know because we're not living that experience. And I think it's important to provide support. Like I have my friend who said, you know, I'm waiting for them to like approve my documents. I sent it like 2 months ago. I was like, there's nothing I can say. That's ridiculous. But I mean, that's your you know, that's your experience, you know. And so I think there's that part of it too, because I think we just think that it's like the visa thing, but you know, they can also get support. And I think the mentorship that you're talking about.
And even like because once again, faculty are one, like, you know, one group of people. They're not the only one who can do everything. So when we talk about Title IX coordinators and Title VI coordinators, are students aware of what Title VI is? What is that? Yeah, of what Title VI is.
Honestly, I'll be honest, I don't even know what Title VI is. I know Title IX is.
So Title VI basically protects diversity in culture and any experiences of racism, microaggression. So if you are, let's say, and this is, and well, and this is my transparent full disclosure moment. I was informed or I was known about the Title VI when I experienced racism in my institution. So.
I've never heard of
I've heard of Title IX. I was like, oh, what's Title VI though?
Never heard that. But also like, is that not a problem specifically as programs are training us as counselor educators, we should know where to send our supervisees if they have an issue, or our students in our classes if there's an issue, or to bring ourselves to if we have an issue. Like this, I feel like it should be in a welcome packet, but also like we emphasize Title IX all the time, right? We even tell our, I mean, in supervision, right? I'm telling my supervisee, okay, Title IX, I'll consider that. Never heard of Title VI.
No, this is the first time I've ever heard of Title VI, and I'm like, this is, if I wish I would have known about this sooner.
Because this, once again, this goes back to this microaggression racism that goes under, like when I was asked, Ash, would you want to talk to a Title VI coordinator and file a complaint, a legal action? I was like, no, I don't want to do this. And that came from my own, like, there were a lot of obviously contextual factors as to why I chose that, but also having that space that I was connected to somebody who understood the legal channels, because international students don't know about the legal stuff in the US. Like, it's a lot of work to do to try to figure out what are the rules, as simple as even driving rules. Like international students may not know what driving rules look like in the US unless somebody helps them go through that. Or transportation. Is every place have public transportation? Like that was a cultural shock for me when I found that there's no public transportation because I came and studied in a city whose population was 13,000. And I did not know the importance that I had to have a car.
Well, I think on the flip side too, that some international students come, people think that international students come to the US with all this money to buy these like really expensive cars. And it's like, that's not every international student. And no, they all have, and that they're bad drivers. It's like, well, no, that may be just a couple of people in town that you don't like the way that they drive. But I don't think you could just say international people are bad drivers or that they all can afford really nice cars. You know, I think there's just a lot of
conception of
misconceptions of like what it, what it means to be an international student.
absolutely. And I think there's also this thing about why that we see migration as a form of privilege, because migration is only, especially legal migration, is only affordable when you have the financial means. However, on the other hand, in 1993, the United Nations Human Rights Commissions declared migration as a basic human right. So how is it that something that is a basic human right only be afforded by the privileged? So this is all I had for you all, because my next slide is basically my contact information. So thoughts, questions, comments?
This was amazing.
Yeah, this
And
is.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
You did a wonderful job and obviously educated us. Yeah, that's first comment. And a second comment, or I guess question. I'm now wondering, like, as I continue to practice supervision and certainly will still be supervising some international students. Okay, I guess from my perspective, I'm now plugged into my university working for the graduate students, so I know what's out there, I know what resources, and I know how to facilitate those connections and bring it, like you mentioned, like bring it into the classroom, bring it into the session, and not just say like, here's this building address, right? How do we, as council educators, supervisors, working at universities, if you don't work at a university that doesn't have those resources, right? What are some larger resources? So I wrote down International Student and Faculty Network.
Yeah, Interest Network, INFIN.
Right, because I had never heard of that before this presentation either. How does one who doesn't have an ASH sitting in front of them, right, get connected to larger systems if your university does not have those micro systems of support?
So I would say it's like, if it isn't in your university, let's start small. Is there another university in your city? If it's not in your city, is there another university in the neighboring state? Like, when we as counselor educators in training look up professors, look up research agendas, interests, it's all about fostering that connection. We look at CSI. Chi Sigma Iota is an international organization. That's one of the biggest counseling profession where you can connect students with international faculty, or even students who hold other minoritized or marginalized identity. Looking at NBCC, if NBCC organizes a minority fellowship, clearly NBCC has some professional people who hold minoritized or marginalized identity. Fostering those, giving those examples, or at least showing that these are the people, hey, here is the phone number of this and this person, she was last year's fellow. Connect to her, or even looking, even if it's not in your department, at your institution, what other programs are that are within your health sciences field or within the education field, because counseling in different schools are under the umbrella of education, like the School of Education or School of Health Sciences. Like for ISU, it is School of Health Sciences. So who are the other health sciences professionals in your department, in the interdepartment? Are there other international students in that department? Connect them to that person. Because although this person may be coming in to become a counselor or a counselor educator, they're still international student first. That identity is predominant and it permeates every interaction in the professional life. So instead of just looking them as, oh, here's the master students who may be supported just by a counselor or counselor educator, no. Maybe that professor in the business department who is an international faculty is likely to provide better mentorship. So, looking at our own professional counseling organizations or even our regional counselor educator organizations. Like thanks to Dr. Chan, I was able to connect with Dr. Harichan and Dr. Wally at, now he's in Texas, but he was at SUNY when I first got to meet him, or when I first got to meet Dr. Wally, who was at Southern Oregon University. But Dr. Chan, so that was in his way, he provided that mentorship for me to connect me to other international folks. Yeah, thank you for attending. And I am going to stop my recording. Thank you.